but China has and is in the process of creating those hundreds of years of established law and practice and putting in place right now. So it's an extraordinary process that's going on right now, and I think you are all privileged to be part of this absolute transformation of the world's economy. And it won't happen again in my lifetime, and I dare say it won't happen in your lifetime. You've got a window of opportunity to do amazing things. So this is what's happening. It's this scale and pace of change. So that is what's happening in China in the financial markets at the moment. So they're creating all the building blocks to create a sustainable financial system. So you go from that one very big state-owned bank to a system now where we have a whole series of commercial banks and policy banks. We've got the most recent one being the Agricultural Bank, which has just launched the world's biggest IPO. And now China has, I think on the latest statistics, 4 of the top 10 banks in the world by market capitalisation, and three in the top 5. So this is extraordinary. Now, there are many reasons why, from a market capitalisation point of view, they're big, but nonetheless, these banks are enormous. In addition to that, China's now building the other building blocks that are important for a financial system. They've created stock exchanges. We've got one of the world's most active stock exchanges in Shanghai. Shenzhen has a second board for the second tier companies that are now being listed on that stock exchange. China has created rules and regulations. As a lawyer, it's like a pig in mud up here at the moment because they've created company laws, security laws, bankruptcy laws, property laws, you name it. They've created it over the last 10 or 15 years. Now, a lot of these laws aren't as detailed as the laws in the Western world, but they remain the fundamental basis for developing a sound financial system. And that sound financial system is absolutely critical if you want to manage capital properly in this country. So at the moment, you've got a situation when, I'm trying to get to the environment here, you've got a situation where you've got most of the enterprise in China that by dollar value, RMB value, is actually controlled by the state-owned enterprises. But in number terms, a very large number of the enterprises in China are privately owned businesses. And in fact, we don't often realise that, but a lot of the economy of China is actually underpinned by a very strong privately owned economy. Now, what's happened over the last couple of years is that the money that's been channeled into these major infrastructure projects has really just gone straight into state-owned enterprises. It's been used to build the roads, the railroads, and it's all the massive state-owned enterprises that are doing all the big things and gobbling up all the capital. So the small to medium-sized enterprises, the businesses that are trying to operate in the agricultural sector and the environmental sector, all those other sectors which are more entrepreneurial, have been starved for capital. And they are finding it very difficult to get access to bank loans or alternative other sources of funding. So what's happening now is that China, as a policy direction, is moving towards creating a financial system that will support the development not only of a strong state-owned system, but also a very strong privately owned system by giving it access to different forms of capital. So what are we seeing now? We're seeing, for example, the establishment of various funds of various sorts. Private equity funds are being established. RMB-denominated private equity funds where large pools of money are being created and held by privately owned enterprises for collective use and investment, largely in slightly higher risk businesses around the place. And this is a very important source of capital for a lot of people. The other very significant investment, and one which I'm very passionate about, is the development of a bond market in China. I said before that we had one very large state-owned bank lending money to others. We now have a situation where we have a lot of very big banks, large policy banks, commercial banks, and some mid-tier commercial banks who are lending money. So they provide money by way of loans to corporations. But in the Western world, that is only one way in which corporations can get access to funding. The other is going through the bond market. In the Western environment, and I'm not saying the West is the best at the moment, But we're looking at a relative balance between debt funding and bond funding. So if a corporation wants to go and borrow money, it can do so from a bank, it can get money directly from a bank, or it can issue bonds into the market. And if you issue bonds into the market, you bypass the banks, because what you're doing is issuing a securitized product that is being sold either directly on the retail market to mums and dads who just want to buy a AAA rated name, which is going to give them a fixed rate of return, a good investment return, or it's being sold to institutional investors who hold it in superannuation funds or pension funds. So in an Australian context, your money, which is invested in Australian superannuation, is held by a fund. And that fund buys a lot of bonds because it provides a good rate of return. So this is the other part. At the moment, China's starved of that component, the bond market. Now, the country, from a policy directive, is actually pushing really, really hard to open up that side of the market. There are a lot of structural difficulties in doing that, because to do so, you need to have a proper way of buying and selling the bonds, of pricing them, of people being in the market to provide a price for them. Some of them will be listed on stock exchanges, some will be sold privately. You need people who understand the market, you need to be able to disclose information appropriately to the market. So lots of things need to be done, but it's all happening. And I think what we will see over the next few years is the opening up of that bond market. That, to my mind, will be one of the most significant things, along with the opening up of the equity markets and the stock exchanges, that has happened in China, and which will influence, will have a huge impact on the rest of the world, because there's enormous sources of capital here that will be available for a reallocation in a different way to different sorts of enterprises. So that's sort of like the second limb, and I'll move on quickly. The third limb of the current reform, of the current policy program at the moment, is really one of the rural reform process, where the country is moving away from very small ownership of very small entitlements to land around the countryside, to allowing collective ownership, to enable people to sell or pass on their interests to others. So that's very important, because that will open up the agricultural sector to more productive means of agriculture as larger organisations come in to develop that. And then finally, on the environment side, this is a huge focus for China. I know that Copenhagen didn't achieve the results that many in the West wanted to achieve, but China is pushing ahead with amazing reforms at the moment. The emphasis that it's now putting on renewable energy is quite extraordinary. It's got the world's biggest photovoltaic cell manufacturers, moving into wind production and other forms of renewable energy, and they're at the same time cleaning up the coal sector, which is one of the huge pollutants to the environment. And this is where Australian technology, with our brown coal technology, is absolutely vital to helping a lot of Chinese enterprises clean up things. So they're the four main components of what's happening at the moment. I think for the next 5 years, we're going to see more emphasis on the environment, more and continued emphasis on financial reform, which I think will support all these other initiatives. So, there's my 2 minutes.
Thanks, David. That's great. You obviously have a vast wealth of experience that you can bring to bear on this issue. So, like I said to begin with, we're going to launch straight into questions with David. So, up the front.
Hello, my name is Liu Kang, and I'm a Chinese delegate. And now we know that China is trying to move up on the value-added chain, and also the workers from the factories, they're asking for better working conditions and higher salaries, which has happened both with the foreigner companies or like the Chinese company. This is part of like just happened in the Foxconn situation. And also you mentioned in your speech that the implementation of the stimulus package from the for the like in Chongqing or Sichuan that attracts the labor from the east coast to the inland. So my question is that what impact it would have what impact it would have on the business cooperation with the foreign companies?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. And not one that's easy to answer quickly, but you know, the important point you made at the beginning there is that China is seeking to move up the value chain, moving from a low